newest season of Dexter has introduced us to one of the most chilling and mysterious antagonists in franchise history, the New York Ripper. This unseen killer has terrorized New York City for years, claimed at least 22 lives, and continues to torment the families of his victims long after he stopped killing. His murder weapon sits in Leon Prater's trophy collection, and he's become the obsession of Detective Claudette Wallace. But who is the New York Ripper? What makes him so terrifying? And how does he connect to Dexter's story and resurrection? In this video, we're going to break down everything we know about this mysterious killer, analyze his methods, examine his psychological profile, explore how he or she fits into the larger storyline of Dexter Resurrection. And in order to do that, we first need to understand the Ripper's killing spree. The New York Ripper operated in New York City for an unknown period, terrorizing the streets that Leon Prater once played on as a child. According to Detective Wallace's crime board, the confirmed body count sits at 22 victims, though that number could be higher. What made the Ripper particularly terrifying wasn't just the number of people he killed, but how he killed them. Every single victim was disemboweled, showing a particular level of cruelty that I'm gonna have to blur out for this video. The Ripper used a specific weapon, a long rod with a sharp hook at the end and a handle at the base. Think of it as a modified crowbar or manhole cover hook. Detective Wallace initially theorized he used a crowbar-like tool, but as Dexter pointed out during her lecture, a hooked weapon that can be swung better matches the blood spatter patterns found at the crime scenes. The fact that this exact weapon ended up in Leon Prater's trophy collection raises some very interesting questions about how Prater acquired it, and we'll look into that later in the video. But first, let's talk about the Ripper's sudden stop and what it could mean. After years of killing, the New York Ripper suddenly stopped, not because he was caught, not because he was dead, but apparently by choice. For 5 years, there were no new victims, no new crime scenes, no new disembowelments, but the Ripper didn't disappear entirely. Instead, he found a new way to terrorize people, through phone calls to the families of his victims, which Detective Claudette really shows to a bunch of teenagers. Looking at this voice evidence, it actually creates some interesting implications for our New York Ripper theories. Most telling is his incredible self-control. He voluntarily stopped killing after years of murder, something almost unheard of among serial killers. This isn't someone driven by uncomfortable urges, but someone who makes calculated decisions about when and how to satisfy his needs. The fact that the voice sounds like a Caucasian man in his mid-30s to 40s immediately rules out several suspects. It's clearly not Blessing Kamara. There's no trace of a Sierra Leone accent, which would be nearly impossible to completely suppress even with a voice modulator. It's obviously not Charlie, eliminating the female suspects entirely. But here's where it gets really intriguing. If the voice genuinely resembles Jonah Mitchell, that could actually support the theory despite the timeline issues we discussed. Remember, Jonah would be in his 30s by now, which fits perfectly with the voice profile. The question is whether that's his real voice or if he's using modulation technology. However, there's another possibility that completely changes everything. What if he didn't voluntarily stop? The 5-year gap could suggest that the Ripper is already dead. Maybe someone else killed him, or he died from natural causes, and the phone calls are pre-recorded messages sent out to automatically torment families on specific dates. This would explain why he never slips up and says anything traceable, because they're not live calls at all. The voice analyst also strengthens the case against Leon Prater being the Ripper. While we can't rule out voice modulation entirely, it would be a pretty sophisticated setup for someone who consistently alters their voice for years of phone calls. Plus, Prater's distinctive speaking patterns and mannerisms would be completely hard to mask. If the Ripper is dead, it completely changes the dynamic. Detective Wallace could be obsessing over a ghost, while the real question becomes who has access to his recordings, and why they're continuing his psychological warfare. This could point towards an accomplice, a successor, or even someone using the Ripper's work to cover their own crimes. What's particularly interesting is that Detective Wallace and the NYPD can't determine if it's the killer's real voice or a modulator. This suggests whoever is making these calls is tech-savvy enough to make it ambiguous, which points towards someone with either technical knowledge or significant resources. The mid-30s to 40s age range also opens up possibility for entirely new characters we haven't met yet. The Ripper could be someone from Dexter's past, or a completely fresh antagonist that the writers are saving for a big reveal. For the plot, this profile points to someone towards significant resources, technical knowledge, and possibly military or law enforcement training. Whether alive or dead, this isn't some impulsive killer. This is someone who could be hiding in plain sight, using their skills to orchestrate long-term psychological warfare that continues even beyond the grave. If we're being honest, the voice evidence makes Jonah Mitchell look more plausible than before, assuming he somehow survived the Oliver Saxon situation. The accent and age range match up perfectly, and we know that from season 6 that Jonah had that cold, calculated way of speaking that could easily come across as the voice described in these calls. The lack of any distinctive regional accent also suggests this person has either lived in multiple places or deliberately trained themselves to speak in a generic American accent, which could fit someone trying to hide their identity or geographic origins. Moving on, there is another key piece of information that we need to talk about, and it could be very subtle foreshadowing by the writers. But first, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying the video so far. Detective Claudette Wallace's obsession with the New York Ripper case reveals something crucial. This isn't just any unsolved case, it's one that has defined her entire career. The fact that she was assigned to it when she first joined the force suggests the Ripper's crimes span decades, potentially making him one of the longest operating serial killers in the Dexter universe. What makes this particularly significant is how Wallace's fixation nearly destroyed her career once before, which raises an interesting question. What if she got too close to the truth? The Ripper's ability to stay ahead of a super detective for years suggests he either has inside knowledge of police procedures or is monitoring the investigation closely. This could point towards someone with law enforcement connections, maybe a former cop, federal agent, or even someone who's been feeding information to the Ripper. The parallel to Dokes and LaGuerta is telling. Both of those characters were ultimately killed because they got too close to exposing a serial killer. If Wallace continues her pursuit of the Ripper, she could be walking into the same trap. The Ripper has already shown he can torment people psychologically for years. Imagine what he could do to the detective who's been hunting him. This pattern becomes even more ominous when you consider the fact that she's giving lectures about the case, and it also suggests that the Ripper might be monitoring her public appearances, learning how close she's gotten to the truth. This could set up a cat-and-mouse dynamic, where Wallace unknowingly reveals her progress to the very person she's hunting. For future plotlines, Wallace's obsession could make her either the key to finally catching the Ripper or his next victim. If the Ripper is someone we haven't met yet, perhaps a character from Dexter's past or someone connected to the Miami Metro days, Wallace's investigation could be what draws them back into the open. The writers might be setting up Wallace as a bridge between the New York storyline and Dexter's complicated history with law enforcement officers who get too close to the truth. The New York Ripper's weapon of choice was a long rod with a sharp hook at the end and a handle at the base, essentially a manhole cover hook that somehow ended up in Leon Prater's trophy collection. Detective Wallace initially theorized the Ripper used a crowbar-like tool, but Dexter's expertise as a blood spatter analyst led him to suggest that a hooked weapon capable of being swung would better match the blood patterns from the crime scenes. This detail becomes particularly intriguing when considering the potential connections to past characters, especially given the weapon's striking similarity to tools wielded in previous seasons. One of the most compelling theories connects this weapon to Jonah Mitchell from Season 6's Nebraska episode. During his confrontation with Dexter, Jonah demonstrated skill precision wielding a hook-like tool at the hardware store where he worked, later using this same implement to attack Dexter. The resemblance between Jonah's weapon and the New York Ripper's manhole cover has sparked speculation about whether this was deliberate foreshadowing by the writers, suggesting Jonah's evolution from single murderer to prolific serial killer. However, this theory faces significant timeline issues. The Ripper was active during Leon Prater's childhood decades ago, but Prater appears roughly 20 years older than Jonah, making it chronologically impossible. Additionally, Oliver Saxon files in Season 8 referencing eliminating J. Mitchell, potentially ruling out Jonah's survival entirety. One of the most intriguing aspects of the New York Ripper story is how his murder weapon ended up in Leon Prater's trophy collection. Prater reveals that the Ripper terrorized the very streets he played on as a child in New York City, describing the killer as highly prolific and never caught, with what sounds like admiration rather than fear. But how did Prater acquire this signature tool? He could have purchased it from someone who found it after the Ripper abandoned it, given his extensive connections in the true crime memorabilia world. More disturbingly, there's the possibility that Prater has a direct connection to the Ripper himself, whether as the killer or someone who knows the killer's identity. The way he discusses the case with such detailed knowledge and apparent admiration raises red flags, especially when he specifically shows the weapon to Dexter, potentially testing his reaction to another killer's work. The weapon's presence in Prater's collection sets up several compelling narrative directions for future plotlines. Detective Wallace's obsession with the Ripper case creates a perfect convergence point where her expertise could expose Prater's entire serial killer network. If the actual Ripper is still alive and discovers their signature tool being displayed like a museum piece, it could trigger them to emerge from hiding, creating a three-way conflict between Dexter, Wallace, and the original killer. Most intriguingly, the weapon could become the catalyst for revealing how deep Prater's influence runs within law enforcement, potentially exposing a network of corruption that has protected either him or the real Ripper for decades. Whether this storyline develops this season or serves as a setup for future seasons, the murder weapon represents a ticking time bomb that could create a very interesting storyline. Moving on, the New York Ripper represents something we haven't seen much of in the Dexter universe. A killer who potentially still active and completely unknown to law enforcement. Most of the serial killers Dexter had encountered had either been caught, identified, or at least suspected by someone. The Trinity Killer was being hunted by the FBI. The Ice Truck Killer revealed himself to Dexter. The Doomsday Killers were working with Miami Metro. But the Ripper has managed to stay completely off the radar while continuing to terrorize people. This presents a fascinating potential dynamic. If Dexter were to encounter the Ripper, it would be like facing someone who's even better at hiding than he is. The Ripper has managed to stop killing while still satisfying his psychological needs through the phone calls. That's a level of adaptation and evolution that even Dexter hasn't shown. There's also the question of whether the Ripper fits Dexter's code. The Ripper kills innocent people, tortures them, and continues to torment their families. He's exactly the kind of person Dexter would normally target. But the Ripper has also proven that he can disappear completely when he wants to. Hunting someone like that could be Dexter's greatest challenge yet. So, given what we know about the New York Ripper, there are several theories about where his story might go in Dexter Resurrection. For one, we have the Jonah Mitchell theory. This theory suggests that Jonah Mitchell from Season 6's Nebraska episode evolved into the New York Ripper. The evidence centers on his demonstrated skill with hook-like tools at the hardware store and his violent confrontation with Dexter using similar implements. Additionally, Oliver Sacks in Season 8 files reference eliminating Jay Mitchell, potentially confirming Jonah's death years before the current timeline. Our next theory is a mystery character introduction. The Ripper could be an entirely new character yet to be introduced, allowing the writers creative freedom without being constrained by existing continuity. This approach would let them craft a fresh antagonist specifically designed to challenge Dexter in ways that previous villains haven't, while avoiding the complications that come with resurrecting past characters or making shocking reveals about established ones. This also brings up the question of the timeline for Revelation, Season 1, 2, or 3. Given the weapon's prominent placement in Prater's collection and Detective Wallace's obsession with the case, the Ripper's storyline feels like it must pay off eventually. However, it could serve as background setup for Season 1 while becoming the main antagonist in Season 2 or 3. This would allow proper development of whoever the killer turns out to be rather than rushing the reveal. The most compelling theory suggests Prater himself is the New York Ripper, using his wealth and public persona as cover. His intimate knowledge of the case, possession of the actual murder weapon, and the way he speaks about the killer with apparent admiration all raise red flags. However, this would recycle the respected public figure secretly being the killer twist that Dexter has used multiple times before. Regardless of which theory proves true, Detective Wallace's relentless pursuit of the New York Ripper could ultimately seal her fate. Her obsession with solving this career-defining mystery might lead her to uncover dangerous truths that certain people want to keep buried. Whether the Ripper is still alive and sees her as a threat, or powerful figures connected to the case decide she's gotten too close to exposing their secrets, Wallace's investigation could make her a target. Ironically, if Wallace decides to dig deeper into Dexter and Harrison's connection to the Ryan Foster murder, her death could come at a perfect moment to save them both. Just as she's about to expose their involvement or make arrests, the Ripper or their associates could eliminate her, destroying her evidence and removing the one detective sharp enough to piece together the Morgan family's deadly secrets. Her tragic end would serve as both a consequence of her obsession and an unexpected salvation for father and son. Another theory is that the Ripper is already dead. This theory opens up fascinating questions about who killed the Ripper and whether we already know them. If the New York Ripper was eliminated by another serial killer, it could tie into Prater's network, suggesting one of his dinner party guests took out the competition years ago. This would explain why the killing stopped abruptly and how Prater acquired the murder weapon. Perhaps he purchased it from the very person who eliminated the Ripper, unknowingly creating a direct link between his collection and another active killer. This revelation could also mean that whoever killed the Ripper has been watching Prater's operation from the shadows, potentially setting up a new antagonist who sees the dinner party group as threats to their own territory. And there's one more theory, Claudette Wallace as the Ripper. The most shocking twist would reveal that Detective Wallace herself is the New York Ripper, using her position to stay ahead of the investigation while appearing obsessed with solving the case. This would explain her intimate knowledge of the killer's methods and her ability to evade capture, though it would require significant setup to be believable and avoid feeling like a cheap shock reveal. But these are just some of my thoughts. I'm curious to hear yours too. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.